Montana's Native People, Perspectives on the Clovis Child, hosted by the Yellowstone Gateway Museum. My name is Diane Chalfant, and I'm a volunteer and board member of the Yellowstone Gateway Museum here in Livingston, Montana. The Clovis Child refers to the 12,600-year-old Anzick site in Park County, Montana, the oldest known burial site in North America. Since it was first discovered in the 1960s, the site and the remains of the child buried there have been the focus of cultural and scientific study. The series is career-oriented, and it's directed toward college and high school students considering careers in the fields related to our speakers' work. We've asked our speakers to talk about their work, their various perspectives on the Clovis Child, and their personal journey toward their professions. In a moment, I'll introduce the museum's interim director, Karen Reinhardt. But first, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so you'll know how to participate in today's event. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenter, Dr. Shane Doyle. To do so, just type your questions into the Q&A at the bottom of the control panel, and Karen and I will read the questions and share them with our speaker. As time allows, Dr. Doyle will answer as many of the questions as he can during the webinar, but also after in a Q&A session just at the end of the presentation. We've also provided a chat box at the bottom as well, and the chat box is for you to chat with other participants and with us, the host, today. We have many participants today, and we want to be sure that we're able to track and answer any questions that you may have. So again, if you have questions of our speakers, please use the Q&A tab, not the chat tab. We will be recording the webinar, and we'll upload it to Yellowstone Gateway Museum's YouTube channel after the event. And finally, following the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to take a very brief poll, and we hope you'll do that. We'd like to use the results from the poll to continue to improve the webinar series. So I'd like now to introduce Yellowstone Gateway Museum's interim director, Karen Reinhardt.
Thank you, Diane, for the introduction and for all of your hard work. We'd like to also thank Humanities Montana for funding the webinar series and Montana Office of Public Instruction for additional support. I hope that our viewers will register for the remaining webinar programs every Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. through December 1st. Next week, join us for historian Crystal Alegria's presentation, Community History Through the Lens of the Anzick Site. I'd now like to introduce Dr. Shane Doyle. He has been a singer of Northern Plains tribal style of music for 30 years. Doyle holds a doctorate in curriculum and instruction with 20 years of teaching experience and has designed American Indian curriculum for Montana Public Schools, the National Park Service, and the Museum of the Rockies. Doyle serves on many boards, including Extreme History Project, the Archaeological Conservancy, the Montana Arts Council Culture and Aesthetics Committee, the Governor's Parks and Focus Committee, and more. He is a widely sought speaker on Northern Plains tribal culture and public lands in Montana, was instrumental in the repatriation of the Anzick Clovis Child, which we'll learn about today, and studied genetics with the University of Copenhagen, Denmark in 2016. Shane and his wife Megan and their 5 children reside in Bozeman. Enjoy the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Karen and Diane, for all the hard work that you put into getting this together, organizing everything. And of course, thank you to Humanities Montana. This is a great, wonderful opportunity, I think, for all of us to just reach out to the public schools, all the students and teachers, and all of us just have a moment together to reflect on just some of the epic history that we have here in our state. And you know, I think that someday one of these young high school students that's watching will go off to Hollywood or something, and you know, they can do a whole CGI full-length feature on this story, because I really feel like it has that level of just intrigue, and just the compelling nature of all the different aspects of the story make it something that is fit for Hollywood. And so I have a presentation I want to share with everyone, and especially for the young people out there, encourage them to think about what they're going to do as they get older, you know, when they go into college, what they want to research. You know, there's all different types of things that they can study in college and write about, think about, and work on. And that's part of the reason why I'm so excited about this opportunity, is just to kind of share some of the stuff that I've been involved with, and especially this particular research topic, and this boy that we all love, the Anzick boy. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see, I'm going to share my screen, and let's see. See that now?
Good.
Yep. Okay. And so I came up with this title years back when I first found out about the study of the boy. And so double helixes, a medicine wheel country, sacred circles of life and love. And I feel like this area that we call Big Sky Country, this area that all of us know as the last best place that we love so much, that has the mountains and the plains and the rivers and all that, you know, that's the medicine wheel country that people have lived here for thousands of years, since the Anzick boy lived in a seasonal cycle. They traveled, they moved their homes throughout the year. They understood where to go at what time of the year to get the best things from the land. And I just thought, wow, that's so interesting to me, how this medicine wheel is kind of a two-dimensional, I guess you could say, representation of this genetic code that we know of as a double helix. And so that's kind of a three-dimensional take on something that really the medicine wheel is also in a very scientific and ceremonial way trying to bring together for us as human beings to understand, you know, kind of a basic structure of life. And I feel like no matter where we look in this world, we see circles, and Native people saw them, and they valued the circle. They understood what it meant on so many different levels. And so that's part of the reason why they based their culture on it. Go ahead and move forward here. Whoops. So this is kind of the area, again, I refer to as the medicine wheel country. The northern plains, where we find the medicine wheels all out on the northern plains, over 100 have been found. And we see that in this area of the northern plains that we have a mixture of mountains and plains. And that's what makes this area so special. We have all these different resources here. We have lodgepole pines way out onto the prairie that people can harvest and did historically. We have lots of fresh water. You know, we have ceremonial sites. We just have a whole different plethora of different aspects to this region here that make it a good place to live. You know, it is cold, but you know, once you get used to that, it's not too bad. So the medicine wheel, I believe, is the source of this ceremonial way of life that we see here on the northern plains, and the sun dance is probably the most, I guess, essential symbol of that way of life. And all of the groups, all of the nations who live in this area, the northern plains, have this ceremony up at Blackfeet. I believe it's called the Okan. So on the other side of that coin, the ceremonial aspects that we see in the story, we have a scientific aspect as well. And I think that we kind of see how these two different ways of looking at the world and understanding the world are not that far apart most of the time. They're actually pretty close together because they both value something that I really truly value in my life, and that is the truth. You know, I've always wanted to know the truth, and I've always felt like I was strong enough to accept it. And I didn't want anyone to lie to me or sugarcoat things for me. I didn't want any kind of history that wasn't, you know, the nitty-gritty the dirt on the stuff that I really felt like I needed to understand, you know, not only the world and the history of the human condition, but also what's inside of me as a human being, and how do I relate to everybody else on this planet and all the billions of people that have lived, and you know, how do I fit into you know, nature, the animal kingdom. All those things to me are not just ceremonial questions, they're also basic questions that our curiosity uh, brings us to ask when we start to think deeply about what it means to, you know, be a human being on this planet and to live our lives. And I've always felt like science uh, gives us an opportunity to look more deeply and honestly into those questions. And I know sometimes, you know, people use science in ways that can be destructive. But I feel like overall, what science provides for us as people is a positive thing, and it's a good thing that you know, ultimately we were going to come to grips with, and every culture has on some level some type of scientific understanding of how to move forward and what their past history means to them. And so again, those are two, I guess, sides of a coin, are of the human condition that are kind of coming together on this story. I first met Eska Willerslev and Sarah Anzick and some of the others who were engaged in the study, including Larry Laren, the archaeologist. They're at the site, and there's a photograph of us, Eska and myself and Sarah. And that's when I found out about the study that day. And it was not something that I was aware of before that. You know, I was not brought into the mix before this study took place. I was only told afterwards, and I'm talking about the genetic DNA study. And so that's when I met Eska at the site that day. They revealed what they had discovered, and they asked me what I thought of it. And I told them, first of all, I said, I want to thank you for, you know, what you've done. This discovery here is just so awesome. You know, I was standing there looking at the crazy mountains, thinking about the deep history that my tribe has, and so many different people have, the nations have with that area. And, you know, when he told me that, I was just kind of an overwhelming sense of gratitude to have I guess, a scientific recognition that, you know, my family, my people have been here for 13,000 years or more. And, you know, we've kept it good all that time. And I just had a lot of emotional moment for me. And that's the reason why I said, I want to thank you, first of all. And then the next thing I told him was, now I think you should put the boy back, because, you know, he's kind of given us all that he can give to us at this time. You know, we've taken his DNA from him. I mean, that's pretty significant. I'm not sure that we can get anything else from him that's going to be valuable to us, that's going to be valuable to the human community. And I think it would be more valuable to the human community to show right now our respect and our love for him by returning him to the place that he was originally left by his loved ones. And I think I told him that I thought that would be a good way to recognize the honor, the tradition that these people left, the legacy that was left with that boy. And, you know, it just made sense to me. And so, you know, I sang an honor song that day. You see me with a hand drum there. I wanted to honor everyone involved and the memory of that boy. And it was after that event there that Sarah Anzick decided that she wanted to, well, I'm not sure, you might have to ask her specifically, but to my knowledge, that was the first time that she decided she wanted to repatriate the boy. And so then Eska and I said about going about repatriating the boy, and we began to visit some reservations. We visited 4 reservations in Montana, and I took him and we talked with the tribal historic preservation officers about repatriating the boy. That is taking his remains, what was left of him, and having a reburial, a ceremonial reburial in a way that would bring things together full circle. And so we were able to do that the following spring. So I met them in September, and then in the next June, even before a full year had passed, we decided to have a reburial at the site. And here's a few photographs from the reburial. We had representatives from Crow and Blackfeet, from Salish and Kootenai. Also, you see someone there from the Colville, Washington, and a couple other groups from Washington came over because at the time they were seeking to rebury an ancient relative of theirs, and that one was known as the Kennewick Man, more popularly known as the Kennewick Man. And as it turns out, Eska ended up studying the Kennewick Man as well, at the consent of one of the tribes, and discovered that the Kennewick Man was directly related to those people out in Washington as well. And so they reburied him the next year, the Kennewick Man. And so we've seen some real important reburials following some scientific study that was done on the part of Eska Willerslev and his team over in Copenhagen. But again, I feel like this is the way to come full circle. You know, there's been a study done. The boy was not dug up on purpose. It was an accident. You know, the people that discovered him were there to gather materials to build a wall. And as they dug into the earth, the stuff came out and they discovered this ancient boy. And so it was not anything, they were not archaeologists, they were just construction workers. They didn't know what they had really come across. They had no idea of knowing how old it was or how important it was. And so now that we've found out, now that we've discovered just the significance of this boy, you know, it's a good way to show respect and honor and come full circle and to rebury him. So he's reburied there. But the genetic study also showed a lot of other things.
Excuse me, Dr. Doyle, we had a question about the word repatriation. Some of the students aren't quite sure what that means.
Yep, good question. Repatriation is just kind of a fancy word for returning something. That's all it really is. It's usually used when you're talking about repatriation, when you're talking about returning of like human remains or sacred funerary objects. So that's when we use that term repatriation most frequently. But really, it's just all it means is that this stuff was taken a long time ago without permission, or in a way that was not upstanding. And so now we're returning it back to the rightful owners. And so in this instance, the repatriation, they were returning the Anzick boy to his closest living relatives, which was Native people. So the DNA study showed that the Anzick boy is directly related to pretty much every American Indian in, well, certainly in South America and most likely all in North America, except for way up into Canada with the Inuit and the Aleut. And so the reason why there were so many different tribal groups there at that day on the repatriation, the reburial, was that he's related to everyone. That boy is, you know, a descendant, an ancient ancestor to pretty much everybody, all the Native people here. And so, yeah, good question. You know, repatriations happen all the time. You know, it can be a complex process sometimes. Typically, we get objects repatriated from public museums. And so, you know, for example, if there is a human remains or if there's a funerary object or some other kind of sacred object in like the Smithsonian, because the Smithsonian is a public museum, it's funded through tax dollars, the NAGPRA law, the Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act, allows Native people to go into the Smithsonian and to work with the people there to get those objects returned. And, you know, a lot of times it's not a real simple process. Sometimes it takes time. It always takes a little time. There's paperwork involved. But you know, and it's ongoing. You know, we're always repatriating all the time. There's a lot of things that still need to be repatriated. A lot of objects that were taken in a way that were, you know, violated the trust and, you know, the sanctity of the relationships between Native people and non-Native people. And so, you know, I think a lot of this research is actually dependent upon repatriation as well. And because if we want to continue, or if we want to begin to do DNA research on contemporary people here and do studies on the Native people here in Montana, then I think repatriation is going to have to play a role. Because I don't see, I mean, it's right now we have no other means of getting at ancient remains in a way that's legal or something that we would even consider, other than taking them from a museum, doing a small sample test on them, and reburying them. And so that's one strategy that we've discussed using as we talk about, you know, the potential for doing some studies here in Montana. And no tribe has been studied here in Montana. Although the Blackfeet Nation have been in discussions, and Eskawillerslip we've been up there 3 times now to visit with folks there at the tribal college. And we brought Blackfeet people to Denmark, to Copenhagen, to see the research facilities. And there's an interest in the community to do DNA study at Blackfeet. And so it's possible that we could do a study there within the next few years. And so that's something that we're all working towards, all of us on our team anyway are working towards, but of course it's something that would have to be approved by the Blackfeet Tribal Council, and you know, would have to go through all those steps to make everyone feel good about the safety of a study like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so right now I just wanted to talk a little bit about these photographs in this map. So this is a photograph of one of my great-great-grandparents, my great-great-grandmother, Sarah. When she was born, her name was Strikes the Gun, and she was born, if you look at that map there, you see where it says Crow, and then there's the dark black line, that I guess more or less 3 lines that you see at the Crow between there, and that's Yellowstone River right above it. But if you see the dark black line that separates the Blackfeet country from the Crow, that's where she was born. That line there is the Musselshell River. And it kind of goes through, you know, central Montana. It's a beautiful area, and there's a lot of bison in that area. It's kind of an area that's surrounded by mountains, and there's a gap that goes through there called the Judith Gap, and that would funnel the bison to and from on their yearly migrations, seasonal migrations. And so all the nations of Montana would eventually make their way to that area because that was prime hunting ground for bison and elk as well, and other you know, deer, just everything. And of course the fresh water that was there. So she was born there on that area, and then she married this white man here, Tom Shane, my great-great-grandfather, and then they moved over to, well, they got married about 30 miles from where the Anzick site is today, over by at Fort Parker, which is right off Interstate 90 today, and there's a little historic site set up there. If you ever want to stop and visit when you're coming through Bozeman, I encourage you to do that. And so they got married there, and then they had their children and raised them over at Columbus on the Stillwater River. And then when she died, she was buried in Crow Agency now on the Little Bighorn River. And so that's where her grave is today, on the Little Bighorn River. but you know, her life kind of followed that. And again, she was born and raised in the same area that the Anzick boy was born and raised in. And that's part of the reason why I was brought in to the Anzick study, was because if you look at where the Crow Reservation was originally in 1850, where the Anzick boy was found is right in that Crow Reservation area. Again, he could be related to any, I mean, he is related to likely all of us. And until we do DNA studies on the different tribes, we won't really know if there's one group that's more closely related to him than the others. I'm not so sure that very many Native people want to know the answer to that question, but some people might. I certainly know that the researchers in Denmark would love to know the answer to that. And, you know, a lot of anthropologists and archaeologists would also like to find out what we could discover about the different tribes' history through DNA research. So here, it's amazing, you know, when you think about the fact that that Anzick boy was related to all of us, that there could be so many different languages despite all that. And if you look at the map up here on the right-hand corner, that's some of the language families that eventually made their way onto the Great Plains. We know in North America in general, there's over 500 different nations and languages, basically, because each nation has their own language, their own dialects. And so to think that all those different languages were developed in such a short time, really, from my perspective, you know, 13,000 years, it might sound like a long time, but when you're developing complete languages, to develop as many as 500 in that time frame, I think a lot of linguists are kind of, they still don't understand exactly how that happened. I think that's a mystery. No one's really been able to explain how or why so many languages were here, despite, again, the fact that we all are so closely related if you go back in time. But despite those language differences, and especially here on the Northern Plains, groups were able to come together. They were able to share many different things with one another, and they developed their own universal language. Sign language was not developed because of hearing impairment. It was developed so that people could speak to one another, even though they had different linguistic heritages. And so, again, that's the legacy of the Anzick child. And then if you look down below that, you see a map that kind of shows when white people first came to the continent, how all of the different European goods that they brought and animals and stuff began to make their way onto the Great Plains, and how they were traded from different trade networks. And those trade networks there that were used in the 1800s and 1700s were actually ancient, you know, thousands of years old. And then, of course, we see, you know, the image here of the man using his hands to speak, plain sign language, again, unique in the world. You know, quite an achievement, really. So just to kind of begin to wrap things up here, and talk about some of the stuff that we still need to delve into in terms of research. You know, we have precision medicine, and precision medicine is an aspect of DNA research that allows us to make the best forms of medicine available for specific peoples. And so, you know, most of the medicines that we see today are developed for white European males. And part of the reason we see that is because that's been the history of folks who have had the availability to, you know, for health insurance and other purposes, to use modern medicine the most. And so a lot of other populations outside of that group have not been studied to the extent that they have. So we don't know if every drug is going to be the same for every population. One of the things that we see in Indian country is a high rate of diabetes, for example. There are many different theories about that, why that is the case, or how we can prevent it. And, you know, there's a lot of good research that's going on right now, but one of the things that's not really happening, except for at Salish Kootenai, is doing DNA research to look into American Indian, you know, basic metabolism aspects, or basic aspects of Native American physiology, that would help to inform scientists to create better drugs, for example, to tackle diabetes. And so until we do that in Indian country, until we have, you know, DNA research that allows us to design better medicines exactly for our communities, we're not going to be able to really, you know, reach, you know, use that modern medicine in the best way possible. And so that's one good reason I think that Native people should consider thinking about doing DNA research, so that they can have medicines that are designed specifically for them, and they're not using medicines that were designed for other people. And it used to, you know, historically speaking, researchers would say, well, you know, if the drug works for Chinese people, then it will work for American Indians. Because really, American Indians are just like Chinese people who walked over from the Bering Strait. You know, but what this study shows is that's not true. That actually American Indian people are a combination of different, they have a combination of different ancestries that make them unique genetically speaking. So there's no one else in the world that has the same DNA, the same type of physiological characteristics that Native Americans do. So that's another great reason why we need to continue to do, or we need to start doing this type of research in our communities. Like I said, there is some small studies going on now, but nothing at a real large scale. And I don't think it has to be necessarily at a large scale, but yeah, we have to at least start, I believe, opening our communities up to this type of research so that we can start to get some good medicine from it. Another aspect, of course, is disease prevention. You know, how do we prevent diseases? You know, if we look at the DNA, and we kind of peer more deeply into the history of you know, our conditions as Native people, you know, what are we doing now that is causing this disease? What type of behaviors could we use to prevent this type of thing? So another good reason. And then, of course, health enhancement. All these things, you know, they kind of seem like they're the same thing, but they're all just a little bit different. You know, how can we have the greatest health? How can we enjoy, you know, disease-free life, where we have the energy, you know, where we don't age quickly, you know, where we maintain our strength and vitality. You know, how can we live like the old timers did, where they never really seemed to get old until they were really, really old? I mean, all those types of questions, I think, are worth asking. And, you know, there's a lot of different ways to answer them. And DNA is another means by which we can add to our understanding. And I feel like, again, I've always been interested in the truth. And I feel like that's a tradition in Plains Indian culture. You know, when people fasted, historically speaking, in the mountains or by themselves, you know, they didn't go up there because they were afraid of what they were going to find out. You know, if they were afraid of what was going to be shown to them or given to them, then they would have never gone up there. You know, they went up there because they were willing to accept whatever was going to be given to them. You know, I mean, they had faith and they believed in themselves. And I feel like those are values that we need to continue to emulate. And, you know, I think we've cut off DNA research for a lot of good reasons, because, you know, it just didn't make sense for us. And You know, communities had been burned by it. But I think that, you know, it's a new era. The pandemic has shown that, you know, truth be told, when the smallpox pandemics were happening here in America, there was a cure. There was a vaccine for smallpox. You know, Native people weren't getting it. You know, and here's another example. Here we are in 2020. You know, and what do we know about why we're being so impacted so heavily by COVID-19? We don't know anything. The reason why is because we haven't done any DNA research. You know, we can't say for sure exactly why. When people say, well, why is COVID-19 killing so many Indians? Well, we don't really know. Well, we have to say, well, we're vulnerable. We're a vulnerable population. Well, why are you vulnerable? Well, you know, I mean, there's a lot of different aspects to that vulnerability, we say, right? But we really can't say as a scientist or as a researcher, well, you know, we've been able to look into these different aspects of our condition, and this is what we've discovered. You know, a lot of it is guesswork. I hate to say it, but it's because we just don't have the research underneath to support answering questions like that. But I think it's about time that we do, because I can tell you one thing, this isn't going to be the last pandemic. I mean,
Dr. Doyle, excuse
yeah,
me, but we do have another question for you. It's
yep.
in the similar series, and that is, can you speak to evolution of the Native American diet and how indigenous people's bodies are still trying to adapt to a diet that has been imposed upon them?
That's a great question. I can tell you that's part of the problems with a question like that is that it's almost too simple. I mean, that question, you know, this is one of the things that that came up when we talked about doing research in Browning. Back in the 1880s, here in Montana, there was all the wild game was exhausted. There was nothing to eat here. There was no bison, there was no deer, there was no elk, there was no bunny rabbits. I mean, this place was like sterilized. And so in the 1880s, we had a starvation winter. I think it was 1885. We don't know exactly how many people starved to death, but it was mass, you know. And if you think about how many, what the percentage of population of people who starved to death that winter, you know, I mean, for example, you may have had 3,000 people in Browning that winter, and maybe 1,000 of them starved to death. You're talking about 33% of your population, you know, and not just at Browning, but also at Fort Peck. There was also starvation at Fort Belknap. Crows didn't, I mean, they were pretty skinny that winter, but they didn't have the mass kind of death that the Blackfeet and the folks on the Highline did. But that event, what that did was it kind of created what they call a bottleneck. So you have a population here, and this population, if you think about it, the ones that were still alive by 1885, they had been through a lot. You know, there wasn't a lot of bison left in the 1860s or 70s. They were tough. You know, they went through a lot of hunger periods. So to really starve them to death, I mean, that, you know, you have to go for months and months with no food at all. So what happens is you have a population, and then that winter, they go through a bottleneck, and all these other people die off, and the ones who come through now have lived through a starvation winter. And what that does to a person's metabolism is it changes them on a cellular level. And, you know, it creates the kind of physiological response that is passed down to the next generation. So, and part of the reason why we understand and know that is because Eske Willerslev and his team did studies on groups that were starved to death during World War II. And they looked at a group specifically of Dutch in Amsterdam that the Nazis had basically cut their food supply off for I don't know how long. And, you know, a lot of them starved to death. I mean, thousands. And the ones that didn't, the likelihood that their children would become diabetics was like tripled compared to the normal population. So those people that starved to death passed those genes down to the next generation, so that, you know, the body's response was basically saying, you're not going to starve to death. You're going to, every calorie that you put goes through that mouth of yours is going to stick to your body, because we've already been through this once before and we're not going to let it happen again, right? And so those types of responses are passed down not just one generation or even two, but actually they can go down the line 3 and 4 generations or more. And so that's part of what we're dealing with today as Native people. It's not just the fact that our diets changed. It's the fact that we came through a starvation bottleneck, and that we add that to the fact that our diet has changed, and the fact that our physical lifestyle has changed, and you add into, you know, a bunch of other stress factors and other various factors that contribute to all that, and now you're starting to get a better sense of what's really happening. But we wouldn't really know for sure until we actually studied people. If we looked at, for example, contemporary Blackfeet people or folks at Fort Peck, immediately we would be able to see right in their DNA 1884 would pop out. We'd be able to say, oh yeah, well, it's very clear that, you know, 2 generations ago, this person's ancestor lived through a starvation. And that's what's triggered all of these different, what they call, it's part of what you're, you know, you might have a DNA package, but then there's different triggers that make your DNA do different things. Trying to think of the word that's used. It's become popular lately and more people know it. But basically, you know, whatever you experience in your life, epigenetic will leave an epigenetic marker, and you'll be able to trace that back. And so that's a great question, but again, it's almost too simple when we start to look more deeply into all the different factors. That's just one contributor.
Someone suggested epigenetics as the word.
That's it. Epigenetics, epigenetic markers. And what that is again, you could take identical twins and you put them through different life experiences, what they ate, how they, you know, their activity, and, you know, at points in their life, you know, their genes would begin to trigger different response mechanisms, and you see what's called a cascade effect. You know, when one trigger goes on, it triggers something else, which triggers something else and triggers something else, and it's a cycle. And so we start to have to, again, think about things in terms of cycles, in circles. And again, that's back to native wisdom. You know, that's back to understanding that life is a circle, and, you know, whatever you put into that body is going to have to come full circle in so many different ways, right?
Mm-hmm.
Are there any other questions? I thought I saw a few pop up, but.
There was a question about the Clovis child as just referring to the child as the Clovis child. I'm not sure what the question is, but.
Well, the Anzick child is the Clovis child. I think that, you know, they're used a lot interchangeably. I like to use the Anzick Clovis child because it seems, you know, it makes more sense to me. He was a Clovis child. You know, we think about the Clovis people, you know, that have to be one of the greatest generations ever on this planet. You know, I can't think of any other group that had to be tougher than them. You know, those Clovis people, they had to go through the Ice Age. They were hunting woolly mammoths, you know, 11,000-pound animals that ran 35 miles an hour. It took 6 people to kill a woolly mammoth. You know, they were surrounded by dire wolves, which were like twice the size of modern day wolves, and saber-toothed tigers, and short-faced bears, which were like twice the size of today's grizzly bears. And then they had all the other predators as well that we know of today. And so, I mean, these people, they were special. You know, they had to survive obstacles that any of us on any given day would find extremely difficult just to get through the day, likely, I would assume.
Dr. Doyle, we have about 15 minutes left, and we were wondering if you wanted to, if you'd be willing to talk about your career journey a little bit, and especially for the students listening, thinking about their futures.
Yep, absolutely. You know, my career has been pretty extraordinary. I encourage all of you to get an education, go off to college, and then, you know, don't just set your sights on that bachelor's degree or master's degree. You know, set your sights on that PhD, that doctorate. You know, you want to be a doctor. You want to get all the way to that point, because the further up you go like that, the more opportunities are going to come your way. And you know, I on my career path, I always thought, well, I have to be a professor because that's going to be the only job that I'll be able to have getting my education as a Native person. I studied Native American studies. I studied education, and I just thought, yeah, I don't know how many different jobs I'm going to be able to have. I'm going to have to be a professor, but it didn't work out that way. And I'm doing so many different other things besides being a professor. You know, I teach occasionally here and there, but I work with environmental groups on protection of public lands, on sacred sites. I work with the arts. I do a lot of stuff, public event arts, performance arts, singing. I work with a group here in town called Mountain Time Arts, and we do a lot of performances that have to do with celebrating the indigenous history on this land, and bringing attention to, you know, diversity and inclusion for indigenous people, for people of color, for gay and lesbian, for you know, people that are in wheelchairs. I mean, we all need to be part of the circle. And that's the kind of work that I've been doing. I think that's a common thread that I try to find in all the work that I do. You know, I'm a researcher. You know, I do scientific research, not just genetic research with Dr. Willerslev, but, you know, I study ancient ice patches in the Beartooth Mountains. I'm also on other research teams, you know, looking at archaeological sites throughout the state and the nation. You know, I myself, you know, I'm a runner. I'm an amateur runner, you know, trying to qualify for the Boston Marathon.
Oh,
And so, yeah, I mean, all of that stuff I've been able to do because I've been able to have a career based on my education. And, you know, opportunities come up constantly. And I can't say that enough to the young people out there. You know, if you go out there, you get your education, and you keep an open mind. For Native people, there's always going to be an opportunity. You know, I mean, for example, Eska Willerslev, we're still going back to Browning all the time because the Blackfeet community has shown a lot of interest in doing this research. And so we're with the team right now working with the tribal council and at the Blackfeet Community College to get a resolution passed to do a big DNA study. If we do get that passed, and then we are able to do that study there, then, you know, that's going to be a $10 to $12 million study that's going to take about 4 to 5 years to complete. There's going to be a lot of people who get jobs from that. A lot of those jobs are going to be Blackfeet people. The majority of them are going to be Blackfeet researchers there at the Blackfeet College. You know, the DNA research is going to be done there at the Blackfeet College. And so, you know, that's something that I'm really excited about doing. Hopefully we'll get the opportunity to do that. And so in the meantime, I've got a myriad of other things that I do. like this type of educational work. You know, I design curriculum. I write curriculum all the time for public schools. So, I mean, there's really nothing that I'm not interested in or wouldn't be interested in trying to do if the opportunity presented itself. And I think that's how we are in Indian country anyway. You know, we're human beings, we're people, and then, you know, we just go about our lives, and, you know, we see something good and, you know, we want to be a part of that, or, you know, take some good medicine from it. And, you know, we do that. And, you know, that's what I was taught by people back home. And I feel like those are values in Indian country. But if you know, whatever profession you choose to pursue, you will have great success if you focus in on that, and focus in on your health. You know, make sure again that you be the best person you can be, and then, you know, go about what it is that you're seeking to achieve, and you'll have a balanced life that way. You know, I mean, you won't lose sight of, you know, the main goal, which is feeling good every day and about what you're doing, and feeling empowered and feeling like you're part of that circle and you're giving back. You know, that you're trying to be a role model for other people because it's been passed down to you.
Mhm.
So yeah, I mean, that's some of it.
Dr. Doyle, this whole series is going to have multiple perspectives on the Clovis Child Anzick site. And what do you think is the most important message that the Clovis Child has to share with future generations? We're talking to students now, and we're thinking way into the future.
Well, there's so many different values. That's a tough question to answer. I would say that you know, love your family, love and respect them. That's the message that I get from the Anzick site. I mean, just loud and clear. I mean, how else? I don't think there's any other way to interpret, you know, that burial site. All the stuff that they left with that little boy, and I just think it was such a beautiful tribute and something that's so inspiring after all these years. I would say love your family, respect your family. Now think of your family not just as, you know, you and your mom and dad, or you and your mom, or whatever it is, but, you know, mitaki oyasin, you know, like Oglala Lakota say, you know, all my relatives, you know, I'm a member of this big family, you know, all the animals, the plants, you know, the stars, the water, the rocks, that's part of my family. You know, that's native way of thinking. We don't say they're not part of my family. You know, that's not how Native people have understood their place in the world. You know, we've always understood it as we have a role to play, and part of our, you know, experience and mission in this life is to figure out what that role is. You know, we're all leaders in our own way. I think that those are some of the things that I took from the Anzick boy. You know, he was just a little boy when he died. He had never really done anything. You know, I mean, he was not a hunter. He was not a priest. You know, he was not a warrior. He was just a little boy, but yet they donated all those things. And people say, you know, well, I mean, a lot of people like to think that he was pretty special, that he got a special treatment that most kids that wouldn't have received, I guess, is what they would say. But I don't really think of it that way. I mean, that's not how I perceive it. I feel like he was a normal kid, but back then normal meant pretty extraordinary. And it should today too. Because, you know, as they say in Indian country, back in the old days, every kid was gifted and talented. And I think it's still that way today. But you just have to find out what those gifts are and those talents and celebrate them.
Okay.
All right. Got about 5 minutes, I think. You know, I think, again, back to the needs of research, and this is the type of stuff that I'm going to continue to research, the cultural strength and resilience of Native people. As an anthropologist, as a historian, it's up to you young people, you know, to rewrite the history of Native people. We've been written about by a long time by people who don't really know very much about us. And part of the reason why nobody knows much about us is because we're an oral tradition. You know, we didn't write everything down. You know, if you want to know how we think or how we act or what we value, then you have to come and sit with us and listen to us talk and listen to us be quiet or whatever. You know, for you young people coming up, you have a lot of tasks at hand to bring Native communities into the 21st century in a way that includes our tradition as well as our curiosity and our desire to, you know, be at the cutting edge of everything, because we always were. You know, when horses came, Native people didn't say, "Oh, we don't want horses. We're fine walking around. You know, keep your horses. We have our traditions." They didn't say that. You know, when rifles came in, when different things, you know, basketball came in, they didn't say, "Oh, keep your basketball. You know, we'll just play shinny." You know, they never said that. You know, they've always been open to things that are good and that can enhance their lives, and that also meet with their values, that line up and align with what they think the world is and life should be about. And I feel like, you know, for young Native scholars, they need to be the ones who get out there and lead the way. You know, they have a lot of work to do. I know they're going to do it. You know, we're in a new age now. Finally, you know, our country, since Black Lives Matter, is beginning to understand more fully what it means to be in a post-colonial period, where we begin to look more clear with more clear eyes about our history and what kind of legacy that history has left and why we need to fix that. And I think, you know, it's going to have to be the Native people that do that. You know, it can't be people outside that community can't do it for them.
Are there any more questions? Please, anyone in the any of the participants, if you have questions, just go ahead and type them into the Q&A at the bottom.
I would say, you know, thank you for tuning in. I hope you continue to tune into these and hear what other people have to say. Everyone's going to have a different take on, you know, the whole Anzick boy and what it means to them and how it fits into their careers, how it fits into their identity. You know, like I said, that day, finding out who that boy was and how I was related to him, and right there by the crazy mountains, looking at those sacred mountains, thinking about how long, you know, people have fasted there and prayed there. I mean, it's been very important for my identity. And then to be able to go to Denmark, to be able to work for the University of Copenhagen for a year and a half, to be able to take Native people to Denmark to visit the labs there. All of those things have really helped shape my career, and also, you know, my understanding of what's I'm capable of and what type of opportunities there are, and, you know, why we need to seize them, you know, as Native people, and kind of, you know, take control of our own destiny moving forward.
Shane, there is one more question that came up. Considering all of the phenomenal artifacts left with the Clovis boy, did this child or his family perhaps have status within their tribal unit, or was this a custom? You may have just answered this question, but I wanted to give you another opportunity to speak a little bit more about it.
It's a great question. First of all, I don't think they did a lot of burials. I mean, if you look at contemporary Native people, at least going back this past several hundred years, they didn't do burials really. They did scaffold, ceremonial burials where people were put in the air. And then when you have those types of burials, what happens is, the elements begin to wear away. Pretty soon there's just some bones left after, sometimes a very short time. And then relatives would come by the next season or whatever and kind of collect the bones and put them in an area where maybe the animals wouldn't get to them. So I think that was more common. So just the fact that this kid was buried, first of all, was like very different. I would say that. And I would say that there hasn't been very many discoveries of burials. In fact, he's the only Clovis child or only person ever discovered that's associated with Clovis artifacts. So before he was found, no one knew who Clovis people were. They didn't even know if they were Native American or not. Some people thought they maybe were white people that had come over and died off or something. And so, but going back to whether or not the boy was special or not, I think he must have been a beloved boy. I'll say that. And I think he had a large extended family. And I think they were probably located all in an area in a vicinity that was not that far away and from each other. And when he died, when they came to bury him, I think his relatives probably brought tools to go into his grave. That's kind of what I think. That's just something I've kind of thought about and kind of have surmised, because there was a lot of tools in there for just like a mom and dad. I think it was probably an extended family that contributed to his grave, like 118 tools. I think that, the communities were probably pretty small back 13,000 years ago. And so the idea that they would have like a prestigious family, when you're living in a way that they were, which I have to assume is kind of hand to mouth. I mean, they were up against some serious obstacles in nature, everything from the weather to the animals, everything. So I don't think that they enjoyed a lot of wealth at that time. I think they were probably hard scrabble survivors. And that's the reason why I've never really believed that he was been like a chief's son or something, because I can't imagine that there wasn't you didn't have rich people and on down the line back in those days. Everyone was kind of at the same level and kind of scattered out in smaller groups. So I guess if that makes sense, that's part of the way I perceived this boy, and part of the reason why, like I say, he was normal, but back then normal was extraordinary.
Thank you, Shane. Is there anything else you'd like to add, or shall we conclude the program for now?
I think that's probably about all I have.
Okay.
If no one else has any more questions, just there's a lot of other things that could be said. But if you have any questions or want to continue the conversation, you feel free to email me. And again, I hope you continue to tune in to see what other people have to say about this really remarkable, discovery, and how it connects all of us on all these different levels, and is going to continue to connect us going into the future, and probably will only grow more important with each passing generation.
Thank you, Shane, and thanks to all of our viewers. Next Tuesday, 1:30 p.m., please join us for Crystal Alegria's presentation, Community History Through the Lens of the Anzick Site. And after each program, these live webinars will be uploaded onto the Yellowstone Gateway Museum's YouTube channel about a day or so after the event. So stay tuned and keep coming back for more. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.